This is Jed Distler, and welcome to the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Please consider helping to support this podcast by taking out a paid subscription, and you will find the link to do so in our episode description. Subscribers get a free download at the start of each month, and from time to time, we'll have Zoom meetings for paid subscribers to get together and talk piano. I'm sorry that I haven't had a meeting in a while, actually, but I do plan one sooner than you think. Moving on, a listener suggested that I devote an episode to recordings of the Ballade in G minor, Opus 24 by Edvard Grieg, which is the Norwegian composer's largest solo piano piece, except, of course, for the early piano sonata in E minor, Opus 7. The Ballade is actually a set of variations, which is based on a 16-bar theme that Grieg appropriated from a collection published in 1840, I think, of Norwegian mountain tunes. The variations themselves run the gamut between simple melodic embellishments and recitative-like sequences to virtuosic episodes that sometimes recall Schumann's mercurial scherzando moods, or even out-and-out Franz Lisztian outbursts. Actually, the first 8 variations more or less stick to the theme's melodic and harmonic game plan, but things change in the 9th variation where the piano writing really starts to blossom, and then the remaining variations go in one fell swoop. This is a work that hasn't really securely settled into the active concert repertoire, although it's certainly been recorded many times. Some feel that there's a disparity between form and content in this work, and that it can go on too long for what it has to say. But others feel that it's a neglected masterpiece, and I tend to go toward the neglected masterpiece group of thinkers. However, the Grieg Ballade held a strong emotional significance for the composer because he wrote it shortly after the death of his parents in 1875, when he was going through a period of depression. Grieg himself described the Ballade as, and I quote, "Having been written with my life's blood in days of sorrow and despair." Grieg never performed the Ballade in public. He was a really excellent pianist and played a lot of his music in public. But there is an account of Grieg giving a private performance in 1876 of the Ballade for Dr. Max Abraham, who was the director of the Peters music publishing firm. And apparently, when Grieg finished playing, he was totally exhausted and agitated and shaken by the experience, so much so that he couldn't say a word for some time. But I do have a lot of words to say about the recordings, so let's talk about them now. The premiere recording of the Grieg Ballade was made in 1929 by Leopold Godowsky. Godowsky met Grieg in 1907 in Berlin. I don't know if Godowsky had played the Ballade for Grieg, or if they had discussed the work, or if there was any coaching going on. But it is true that Grieg had hoped that the work might be recorded. And after all, Grieg himself made his own series of recordings in 1903, so he understood the value of the gramophone in disseminating music. When Harold C. Schoenberg wrote about Godowsky in his book, The Great Pianists, he talked about Godowsky's recordings, and he said that basically the recordings really didn't do Godowsky's reputation justice, in that the recordings tended to be kind of careful and inhibited and reserved, sometimes a little stiff, and where expression was kind of in check. But he made an exception for the Grieg Ballade, where Schoenberg said that this had all of the swing and fire and poetry that he displayed, that Godofsky displayed when he played in salons, in informal situations for groups of professionals. And apparently this is where Godofsky really, really came to life as a pianist. And these qualities really do come out in this recording. I think it is probably Godofsky's best recording, and it is very well engineered for its time. I honestly don't know the other recorded versions of the Grieg Ballade that came out in the 78 era, except for the one that Eileen Joyce made in 1943, which has less architectural sweep and continuity than the Godofsky performance, but it has a lot of spontaneity and poetry, especially in how she uses rubato. It's kind of a gentler performance, and I think it's a very congenial and very convincing interpretation. And you really hear that Eileen Joyce was a natural pianist. And speaking of natural pianists, Arthur Rubinstein was on prime technical and expressive form when he set down his recording of the Grieg Ballade in 1953. Now, the sonics are a little close up and dry, as were most of the recordings that RCA Victor made, the solo piano recordings that stemmed from California. I don't know what studio they used, but the California sessions tend to sound kind of dry. I mean, a lot of the Rubinstein recordings, certainly the Jose E. Turby recordings, maybe some of the Horowitz recordings, although the ones that Horowitz made for RCA in Town Hall in New York sound very resplendent. Anyway, this is a marvelous recording, and when Rubinstein was asked about the Grieg Ballade, he replied that, Godofsky made me learn this piece. And Rubinstein also met Grieg briefly in 1902, although I think that was just like a fleeting moment where they shook hands, and that was that. But Rubinstein's Grieg Ballade unquestionably was the early mono era's reference LP version, and I think the performance still holds up quite well. Another distinctive, although relatively reserved, interpretation that was released during the 1950s came from the New Zealand-born pianist Richard Farrell, who was tragically killed in a 1958 automobile crash. In contrast to Rubinstein's interpretation, the sound quality of the Richard Farrell recording that was originally issued on the British Pi label, PYE, the sound quality is more reverberant and plummy, for the lack of a better word, as if it was recorded from a concert hall perspective. And this was reissued in the first of a series of 3 double album CD sets on the New Zealand label Atoll, A-T-O-L-L. And this series encompasses Richard Farrell's complete commercial recordings, in addition to various broadcast and archival recordings. And these 3 releases, unfortunately, are not easy to source, but I have provided a link to a program I did on Richard Farrell for my radio show Between the Keys that aired back in 2023. So you can get to hear his playing. And certainly his Ballade is well worth hearing. And I think you can find it on YouTube. I'm going to look around, and if I find a link, I'll put it in the episode description. George Bolet played for Godofsky when he was a student at the Curtis Institute in the 1930s, but I'm not sure if they ever had a Grieg Ballade coaching session together. Now, Bolet did not record the Grieg Ballade commercially, but there is a very fine live performance from 1987 in Amsterdam, issued by the Marston label in a 6-disc collection called George Bolet Volume 2, Ambassador from the Golden Age. But it should be said that the Audite label issued a 1961 broadcast with Bolet playing the Grieg Ballade, where he is really on tip-top form. And I think it's even more exciting and more scintillating and detailed than in the 1987 performance. But the problem is that he makes a few cuts in the work. Oy, 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 oy. And it's kind of a problem if you're expecting the whole work. So this represents the best of how Bolet played the Ballade, what survives. But if you want to hear him play the entire text, you have the 1987 performance, which is not bad in and of itself, but it's the 1961 radio recording issued on Audita that really shows what Bolet could do in this piece. Aldo Ciccolini recorded the Grieg Ballade for the EMI label in 1964. It was just reissued as part of that big box set on Warner Classics with the complete Ciccolini recordings for the EMI label. I love this recording. I like Ciccolini's brisk and forthright and direct treatment of the theme, which pianists tend to stretch out forever. And also, Ciccolini really keeps the music moving and unified, but he always finds room for subtle harmonic inflections and shapely bass lines. And I think this is a marvelous interpretation, and it's definitely worth checking out. For a more brooding and introspective, yet poetically sensitive interpretation, there's a 1984 recording by the Norwegian pianist Robert Riefling, and his idiomatic authority imprints on every page of the score, and you get such exquisite phrasing and wide dynamic contrasts from him. I don't have the CD release in my collection, but I did find it on YouTube, and I provided a link in my episode description, and I really enjoyed this performance, and I think you will too. I would also describe Peter Jablonski's 1997 recording for Decca as totally idiomatic and natural and flexible. Now, the climaxes may not have the fiery abandon of a Godofsky or Rubinstein, but you sense that they arise from everything that's been building up before, especially in how Peter Jablonski's sonority just really, really opens up in these passages. This release was on Decca, and it might not be so easy to source in physical format, but the Universal Music Group has posted it on YouTube, so this YouTube link is legitimately sanctioned, if you get my drift. You know, there really should be a box set of Peter Jablonski's complete Decca recordings, because he did quite a bit for that label. Although I have to say that since he's been with the Ondine label, his artistry has really ripened and deepened, and he's been charting all kinds of adventurous repertoire territory. I mean, he's really playing at the peak of his powers these days. What a wonderful artist he is. Leif Ove Andsnes got a lot of attention for his recording of the Grieg Ballade. He plays the theme in a sensitive yet rather austere manner, as if to foreshadow his emphasis on the music's darker undercurrents as the piece unfolds. At first, I would have wanted Variation 4 to scintillate much more than Andsnes allows, but to compensate, he gives a special kick and a very special kind of characterization to the left hand's cross rhythms. And the Lisztian climaxes manage to exude both impulsive energy and aristocratic refinement, with Andsnes holding out that strange, disruptive low E-flat, seemingly forever. I like this recording a lot, although I have to admit that it took time for it to grow on me, and I had to listen to it many, many times over the years, and now I'm really, really warming toward it, and it's really up there with my reference versions. Next, I'm going to bring up two Norwegian pianists whose recordings of the Ballade are part of their respective recorded cycles devoted to Grieg's complete piano music. One is by Eva Nordhall, who lived from 1927 until 2006. She recorded a Grieg cycle, I think mostly at the end of the 1970s, for the Bis label, who issued it on LP, and then they brought it out on CD. And she plays the Ballade with idiomatic authority, although I think her Bis recording is kind of a workaday performance. It's not all that super special, certainly compared to the vibrancy and the fluidity of a 1973 broadcast with her that was issued on the CMAX label. And I've provided links to both of these performances so that you can listen and compare for yourself. But I find Einar Steen Nøkkelberg far more imaginative and colorful in the Ballade, with a lot more sweeping continuity. His recording is one of the very best to my mind. In fact, his whole Grieg cycle for the Naxos label is so well worth acquiring. Andre Gunjen on the Hyperion label has received generally excellent reviews for his Grieg recording for his Ballade, and there's much to enjoy in his rounded and refined pianism, which is similar in certain ways to Andsnes and to Richard Farrell. However, and this is my however recommendation, with apologies to David Hurwitz, you know how at the end of his videos he'll say, however, you only have to have one recording. Well, however, for a pianist who fuses the fire in Godofsky, the narrative suite of Nøkkelberg, the directness of Ciccolini, the elegance of Jablonski, and the seasoned authority of Robert Riefling, I keep returning to Antonio Pampabaldi on the Centaur label, and his Grieg Ballade may well be my modern-day reference version at this juncture. His cycle of Grieg's piano music on the Centaur label is consistently satisfying, although I do have to give honorable mention to Håkan Ostbo, who recorded a lot of Grieg for the Brilliant Classics label, and he holds the Ballade together through animated pacing and assiduous tempo relationships from one variation to the next. And this is quite a wonderful and lively performance with no dead spots whatsoever. I would put Håkan Ostbo's Grieg cycle on Brilliant Classics at the head of the class alongside Antonio Pampabaldi and Einar Steen Nøkkelberg. I think these are the three great Grieg piano music cycles that we have. Also, I should mention Sigurd Slåtterbrek, who recorded the Ballade very beautifully on Grieg's 1892 Steinway that's preserved at the composer's home in Trollhaugen. And this is part of a release that includes Grieg's own 1903 G&T recordings, plus Slåtterbrek's interpretive recreation of Grieg's self-interpretations. I should do a separate podcast episode about this release, which is called Chasing the Butterfly. It's a fascinating disc. It also contains a great performance of the Grieg concerto, by the way. So there we have it. This has been a rather limited yet hopefully well-rounded look at Grieg's Ballade in G minor, Opus 24 on disc. And please feel free to explore all of the links that I've provided to access the performances. This is Jed Distler, and you've been listening to the Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and please join me for the next episode and all episodes to come. Take good care of yourself.